For the past several months, I have been listening, transcribing, and editing footage from the American Society for Cybernetics conference entitled Living in Cybernetics, Past, Present, and Future. This ASC conference took place in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University in August of 2014. Thank you, Stuart Umbleby.
Let me just say a few words about my conception of cybernetics. I see cybernetics as providing a general theory of the informational domain, whereas physics provides a general theory of the material domain. So physics explains matter-energy relationships, cybernetics explains control and communication activities.
Well, if you want a definition of cybernetics, you can get it from Norbert Wiener, which is the study of communication and control in animals and the machine.
Since it was the 50th anniversary meeting of the American Society for Cybernetics, I felt compelled to include video from other American Society for Cybernetic conferences I have attended and videotaped over the last 20 years.
Let me begin now with management. I know so little about management that I had to look it up in the dictionary. I used the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language, which has the great advantage over other dictionaries that it has the list of Indo-European roots where these words are coming from. So I looked up management and I found to my delight it is akin to manacles, which I looked up in the dictionary, says constraining the movement of hands. So when I understood what management is all about, constraining the movement of hands, I thought I leave this particular topic to somebody else.
Deep listening is a way of being, and so what I'd like to do is to play a little solo for you. I don't know what I'm going to play. Together we're going to make this piece happen.
Traces from a museum where participants were invited to display cybernetic objects they brought to share with others is also included in this movie.
So this is Elena, and it makes extensive use of gumdrops.
Yes, and what that is a temptation.
Some exhibits are not as committed as other exhibits.
But it was too fragile.
And what is this?
Reminds me of Uribe.
This is a system that is transcomputational. And it gives the illusion that there are patterns, and if you look long enough, you see certain patterns.
Because I'm post-colonial, so we used to...
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, that's right. Post-colonial. I like that.
Post-colonial, so does that mean I should get a...
Post-colonial, Michael.
I should get some...
Let's turn together. Hello, Ronald. Hello, Cloud.
I haven't really looked at it.
That's kind of cool.
Which one? This one?
Yeah.
But what does it demonstrate?
I don't know.
Multiple perspectives.
Hey, I like that.
Well, it's a single world, obviously, you know.
This movie is designed to be a plausible introduction to the ideas, people, and notions associated with cybernetic thinking, understanding, and doing.
What I'm quite interested in is the idea of creating a system that's emergent in nature, which by its very nature you can't know what the outcome will be.
And who are you?
I'm Jude Lombardi.
Why are you videotaping?
Because it's what I usually do at the American Society for Cybernetics. I've been doing it for 20 years.
Good to know. What do you do in Baltimore?
Make movies.
Who controls the technology, especially the editing technology in this kind of practice, is a major thing, and that's just something to think about in terms of sampling large amounts of digital information.
The movie also includes excerpts from presentations during the conference, particularly the small group reports to a proposed set of questions about the future of cybernetics.
The idea was to actually do another one of those using the technology, having done it all in the room without the technology, so then we would practice doing it when we go home, and we can all do this, same sort of way.
I hope you're recording. You get the camera recording the group.
Yeah, because the feedback is cyber mush.
Absolutely. There's music that's been made out of this.
You are welcome to actually join in the fun anytime that you might like.
What would it mean to think about a public intellectual in a kind of design sense, or in the sense in which there is lived and performed and produced in the world? And then we were thinking about how a lot of the systems that we have, including social networks, are supposedly cybernetical, but at the very same time, they're also very linear. They're also not very dynamic, and they also tend to kind of like just perpetuate hierarchies, but it does not allow true feedback to kind of like happen.
This is group 145, the beta version of what emerged from a series of conversations. We had one group over here, which was theme group 5, the context of education from the cybernetic perspective, which we decided maybe education wasn't the right word, and we changed that to learning. Expanded that to think of, if we weren't talking about education, needing to look at both informal and formal learning, as well as why it is that those get separated. So both places of formal learning, like schools, and places of informal learning, like museums or sandboxes. At the same time, there were groups 1 and 4. What we should teach about cybernetics, what is a cybernetic practice as a learner and teacher, which were over here, and realized that those two were actually intertwined questions. And then both groups realized that we needed each other.
Needing each other, our interconnectedness, something Mary Catherine Bateson addressed in one of her presentations at the conference.
Margaret and Gregory had observed mothers and children in 5 different cultures, discussed the effects of different kinds of child rearing on adult character, photographed, taken notes, done projective tests. My mother was doing things that were not done by middle-class American women, like breastfeeding. You got it. How lucky I was. How incredibly lucky to have a mother who questioned the cultural assumptions.
The movie also includes comments and or reports from many of the presidents of the American Society for Cybernetics.
The next speaker is Professor William Reckmeyer. Bill Reckmeyer.
I was in grad school here in Washington, D.C. in the 70s at American University getting my doctorate in Russian studies, and had stumbled onto systems thinking and cybernetics initially through the work of Kenneth Boulding and Heinz von Forster and Gregory Bateson. It wasn't just the ideas, which were really powerful and really engaging and really addressed some of the same kinds of concerns that Stuart mentioned, but it's the culture of the people who are in the cybernetics community that is different than the culture of many of the systems and other communities and the other groups that I've been in that made the biggest difference for me. And I also was blown away by the participatory design. It was a way of structuring self-organizing processes that was really, really effective.
To be a participant observer is actually problematic in American society.
At the core of this conversation is a conversation from a workshop entitled, "What is Cybernetics?"
I'm not going to try to explain what cybernetics is.
Smart
Question
man.
is for you.
I myself don't worry too much about what it is, but I often get the question from people, what is that thing that you're going to? What is the thing? Then I always start with the kybernos, the derivation of the word, and that seems to be a nice entry point, that it's how do we steer things? How do we steer our lives or steer our systems?
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming along to listen to my presentation, and I apologize again for not being with you. The presentation is a little bit of a polemic. The argument I want to make is in support of the conference theme and the insights behind it. Particularly, I want to propose that cybernetics is not just a way of thinking, it should also be considered as a way of acting.
I say cybernetics is an active in conversation.
We had a dinner, and there was an impromptu, people got up and started telling stories. And it went on for about 3 hours. This was the beginning of a major emphasis on the oral tradition and how I can tell you some of the stories that I remember. In particular, one by Stafford Beer about Norbert Wiener. At some point in time, Stafford Beer got up, and those of you who knew Stafford, he had one of these blue hippie shirts on, with long beard. He's telling the story. He said he had a story about Norbert Wiener. And the story was basically, he went off to work one day and had his routine, and he came back from work and he started going to his home. And I'm shortening it because I can't tell it like Stafford did, and I'm not even going to try to imitate it. But he said, and his key didn't work. And so he looks in the door, and the house is completely empty. All the furniture's gone, everything's missing. He's saying, my God, what has happened? So he runs out in the street and says, help, I've been robbed. They've stolen everything from my house. And he saw this little girl, do you know what happened to the house? And she said, yes, Daddy, we moved.
Wiener and also McCulloch had been working very much on the technological applications of cybernetics, which is circular reactions and feedback mechanisms and all that. For several years, cybernetics was concerned exclusively with technological applications. And you got all those wonderful things like automatic pilots and goal-seeking missiles and all that.
What is cybernetics?
Science of regulation, governance, feedback, and causality.
Regulation, governance, feedback, causality.
Regulation. Causality of causality.
Now, Wiener and McCulloch and Heinz and several others at the beginning had been very interested in the philosophical applications of cybernetics. but not very much was done about them early on. And that took until about, I think, the late 60s before things like that came out. And that, if you like, then became the birth of second-order cybernetics, where the focus was no longer on scientists doing things with things, but it was on the scientist himself. Systems that do the observing, and that do the thinking, and that do the exploiting and all that.
I'd like to start with this quote. Many of you will know it. It comes from Margaret Mead's paper, The Cybernetics of Cybernetics, that was presented at the first ASC conference in 1968. This part of her presentation at the very end is actually the part that refers to the cybernetics of cybernetics. Of all the silly ideas, to apply the ideas on the basis of which the society was being formed to itself. This, for me, is at the heart of the understanding of what cybernetics is. Cybernetics is not just a study, but it's a way of acting. And that's really the point of this. I'll talk about how I understand what Mead was asking us to do. We should behave in the way that of the systems that we describe. In other words, that we should reflect our cybernetics within and into the ASC. Do what we are talking about. Walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And finally, we should be using approaches that are cybernetic in their manner. So we should be talking about interaction, we should be conversational, not exclusively, of course, but certainly we should give space to these sorts of ways of being together, these cybernetic ways.
Ooh. Right on, right on.
We talked about form. We talked about the decay of form. We talked about the retardation of that decay when we wish to conserve something we value. We talked about the form of values and desires as constraints. We talked about individual place and positioning as creating awareness of sets of values and desires as constraints. We talked about social form as emerging from conversation rather than power relationships. And we talked about how to initiate or trigger such conversations as we move toward the desirable.
We were talking about the real problems in the world, and our discussion was a discussion about discussion to some extent. We tried to decide the difference between discussion and conversation, and what was the other term we used? I can't remember. Discourse. Yes, that was the one. And then we talked about agency.
There's this wonderful paradox by someone who is not a cybernetician, how we need to assume that we're in the same conversation in order to even talk with each other, whether we're in discourse or conversation or dialogue. But at the same time, we need to assume that we're not in the same conversation in order to hear that we might not be.
There is one society that actually manages this. Alcoholics Anonymous is, to my knowledge, the largest and the longest living anarchic society. And it has no rules, and instead of rules, it has things they call traditions.
And so I suggested that we try to preserve the traditions. Other academic societies will have sections, and various parts of cybernetics have been pursued by other academic societies like the IEEE and SGSR and so forth.
In general, ASC conferences are performative and discussion-oriented, and that's very different.
You know Jeff, he takes a little bit of time, so while he's taking a little bit of time, I thought I'd read a little bit of Gregory Bateson's Mind and Nature, A Necessary Unity. It's from a chapter called Versions of the World, and it's called The Case of Difference. Of all these examples, the simplest but the most profound is the fact that it takes at least two somethings to create a difference. To produce news of difference, i.e. information, there must be two entities, real or imagined, such that the difference between them can be imminent in their mutual relationship. And the whole affair must be such that news of their difference can be represented as a difference inside some information processing entity, such as the brain or perhaps a computer. There is a profound and unanswerable question about the nature of those at least two things that between them generate the difference which becomes information by making a difference. Clearly, each alone for the mind and perception, a non-entity, a non-being. Not different from being and not different from non-being. An unknowable, a ding in sitch. A sound of one hand clapping. The stuff of sensation, then, is a pair of values of some variable, presented over time to a sense organ whose response depends upon the ratio between the members of the pair.
These were a group of people that would really engage in conversation. And we talk about that now, but at the time, that was not the mode for academics. And even in most academic and professional societies, conversation is not the mode. This, for me, was really, really empowering. But it also meant you have dialogue with lots of different people, with lots of different viewpoints, sometimes very heated, not arguments in terms of conflict, but really, really, but you also have a personal connection.
It's quite possible to have a conversation which maintains itself by the following very simple mechanism. And let me explain or exemplify, demonstrate, lay out by some manner. I hesitate for the explanation. Demonstration. Well, that, see, I agree with all you guys, and that's the great thing about it. I agree with you all, and of course I disagree with you all. So, when Stafford talks about inputs and outputs, I say, oh, baloney. I like Stafford immensely, and I know perfectly well he doesn't mean that. Terms of living organisms, for heaven's sake. You think your cell will remain the same from minute to minute? You think the single molecule that isn't changed in a micro-giga nanosecond or something? Well, if you do, I think you're misled. I mean, I suggest you take Prozac or something. My demonstration is as follows. In a conversation, say about that video camera or the other one which I see backing it up, either of you guys, or is there another one waiting around? Well, what happens is that we learn more about each other, you and I of you. We learn how we not only agree about the nature of a couple of some somewhatly different oriented video cameras, but we also learn how we disagree. And in so doing, we learn about each other. And we do that a darn sight more than we learn about video cameras. Mind you, I'm not saying you don't learn about video cameras, but I am saying we learn much more about ourselves, and I'll resort to something like Stafford's Fibonacci series argument in order to show that this is true on the social scale as well as the scale of a conversation between a couple of participants called A and B. Now, I can say this dogmatically because of this. Although I tend to agree with Chicho about formalization, I took care that a whole lot of research effort would not be wasted by making sure that my participants in a conversation or in a more general phenomenon which might involve corporations, might involve societies, nations, politicians, whatever, could be identified with participants, every one of them, if they had these simple properties: organizational closure, informational openness, evolution in a mystery. A mystery. That is, I don't know what time is, nor do you. And I don't believe in it anyhow. It's a very simplistic view of the world. Now that's my first point. Now, how long do I have, please? Another 15 minutes. Very good. Could you give me a 5-minute cue? I will. Thank you. Now, I don't believe in time.
Today is Friday, the 26th.
Let me show you something here, okay?
No, that's Saturday. Today is Friday. The defensive opponent! Acing the other way.
Fine, right where it is, just leave it.
Conversation. Turning together in a willingness to embrace asynchronicity so that something new may emerge.
Conversation with a heavy cybernetics emphasis by people who identify themselves as cyberneticians.
Okay, what is cybernetics?
I see it as a meta-discipline as opposed to interdisciplinary or even trans, but a meta-discipline that also enables a kinds of meta-communication in the sort of Batesonian sense, where you can dissolve or attempt to dissolve double binds and other constellations that are problematic.
I disagree with that.
What do you disagree with?
I disagree that cybernetics is a meta-discipline. I think it is transdiscipline, and I prefer transdiscipline because it's non-hierarchical. Meta embraces hierarchy, and I don't like hierarchies.
And I am saying yes to it floating above the disciplines.
And I have a video just for you.
Good, I look forward to it.
Great.
What does it mean to be a trans, inter, or meta-disciplinary subject? Because this is one of the things that allows us to talk to each other from mathematics, design, and other disciplines.
What does it mean to be a trans, inter, or meta-disciplinary subject? I like to remind us on the system scientist Erich Jansch. In 1972, he reported to the UECD on what multi, inter, and transdisciplinary might stand for. He analyzed the problem by the grade of integration of research via languages or language sharing. It seems to be an approach still fruitful. He describes the thing in the following way. Multidisciplinarity is characterized by a common subject of study, two or more than two disciplines. Each discipline remains in its own language. Interdisciplinarity, there are also two or more disciplines, a common subject. The disciplines, in this case, interact and they try to learn from another by understanding the other's language. And the next step for Jansch is transdisciplinarity. Two or more disciplines work together and develop a new language. That's a difference that makes a difference. Jansch did not deal with meta-disciplinarity. Meta is a Greek word, we all know it, for above. In the Middle Ages, theology stood above all the other fields. Philosophy, for instance, then was the ancilla theologiae, the servant of theology. Analytical philosophy in the 1950s or 1960s regarded itself as a meta-discipline of the other disciplines. It's exactly such a sense. And science studies do the same nowadays. I myself regarded cybernetics always as a transdiscipline, not as a meta-discipline, for exactly that reason. There should not be a dominant position. Historically speaking, it fulfills all criteria of a transdiscipline. It has it developed its own specific language. People are coming from different backgrounds in terms of disciplines, and there is a wide field of common interests and applications.
I made up another symbol here just on the fly. This line with a line through the middle of it means these are opposed to one another a little bit.
That's cool.
Regulation.
What's cybernetics?
An art of steermanship.
The way that you steer the ship, is that control or is that regulation? That is control as in decision maker determine exactly what is due to the system, or is regulation is promoting the system to function itself so that the purpose is fulfilled, or the direction or the aim is achieved.
First order cybernetics is concerned with mechanisms that you are looking at and that you are constructing and that you are controlling. Second order cybernetics is concerned with the constructor, the observer, and the controller.
So if we explain the observer, indeed we have explained how we can do what we are doing. How can we be cyberneticians if we are cyberneticians at all? How we are sociologists or philosophers. How we can argue in favor of an argument and argue against that argument, as we have been doing here.
The word remaining is the word subject. Disciplines have subjects in two senses of the word. They have subjects of study, and disciplines are formed by subjects, persons like you and me. Thank you for your attention.
My take on this is essentially how human beings experience their life and relations.
I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far, find it valuable. And I'll start with an exchange between Catherine and myself some years ago. This concerned the lack of formal courses in cybernetics and such like in universities. And I was bemoaning this, and Catherine came back to me and said, well, if you really want to have an effect, the universities aren't the place to do this. It's the kindergarten schools that are the place. This is a point that is completely obvious, but which had escaped me up till then.
Dr. Bateson is an anthropologist that studies the strangest of all possible groups, namely ourselves. When you read her books, through her essays and her interviews, you realize, well, this is talking about us and our culture. It's sort of related to the question, does a fish know it swims in water?
Just as the fish is the last to know it lives in water, we humans seem to be the last to know that we live in language.
So linguistics is very important in cybernetics because you're talking about language. So how to use the language to communicate with those machine, animal, people, you, and one. So this is my map to use to what cybernetics, what is second order cybernetics, and double bound.
I guess I was living in Palo Alto when I knew Gregory. I was involved at that time in a double bind myself. I came from a double bind family, so I ended up understanding that situation quite well, mostly with the help of Gregory. Only thing one can do in a double bind, as Gregory made it clear, is simply to leave it.
You can't have a change in the system.
No, you can't, because
you have to have a change of the system.
The double binder is going to do everything to bring you back in, and you're vulnerable to those things and so on. So that's what Gregory did for me, and it made a great deal of difference in my life.
Dr. Mary Catherine.
You know, the problem of cybernetics is it is not an academic discipline that belongs in a department. It is an attempt to correct an erroneous way of looking at the world and at knowledge in general. What we would like is to affect what people think is common sense, things that they take for granted, that in fact are problematic, about causality, about purposes, about relationships. Universities don't have departments of epistemological therapy.
What we really were trying to do was to invite you to be curious with us and thinking about curiosity as a context, and at the same time offer what we were saying from the point of view of our learning together and how we came to think about these things, but really from a point of view of not knowing.
You explain how you would explain epistemological therapy?
Epistemological therapy is a merging process. So there is a setting in which people could enter, and there is such a director of the relations between people, and there is a common action. Describe an object. This is only a starting point.
Well, it can be anything, but just for a cup of coffee. If I were enter into this epistemological therapy, how is it going to be unfold?
Coffee reminds me the difference between Italian coffee and American coffee. And when I came here in the US, I'm very curious to taste American coffee. And I think, and I observe the relations that connecting people by the coffee. So I've seen so many people around the streets with the coffee in their hands, and there's a uncommon to see this in Italy, because coffee is a social medium of conversation in the bar, not outside. Okay.
Universities don't have departments of epistemological therapy. They have groups of people with ways of seeing the world that have been built up over long periods of time and get transmitted and elaborated and are sometimes marvelously useful and insightful, but there are errors that we live with in our what we regard as common sense.
There is a tradition in the American Society for Cybernetics for some of its members to address some of the illusions that underlie our hegemonic society. That objectivity is not only possible, but desirable. That aggression is our fundamental emotion. That peace is something to be achieved.
And I think you will all agree with me, is that independence is an illusion. The nature of life is interdependence. I want to spell this out a little bit in relation to child rearing. We are the only country on earth that thinks that what you should do with a newborn baby is put it in a bed, crib, by himself or herself, and put that in a room with no other people. This is basically unknown in the history of the human race. Only it's spreading. We're spreading it. My mother studied child rearing in 5 pre-literate cultures before I was born. And she came back with a lot of ideas. In 1939, which is when I was born, the only women in the United States who breastfed were women in extreme poverty and ignorance. Middle-class women did not breastfeed. And they were instructed by their doctors to feed the baby on a rigid schedule, bottle feed on a rigid schedule, and don't pick the baby up if it cries, because that will spoil it. Now, what this was the most profound rejection of a symbiotic pattern between mother and child. If the mother breastfeeds and feeds when the baby is hungry, the milk increases or decreases in response to the infant's hunger. It's a self-corrective system. What Margaret was saying is write down every time you feed the baby and for how long. Look for a pattern in the baby's demand. There is order immanent in the child's physiology. So what you want to do is discover that immanent order. When you find the pattern, it is the child's pattern that you want to underline. And guess what? The minute you begin to get into the baby's pattern, the mother's milk starts coming down at the time when the baby's going to be hungry. The development of a harmonious pattern of being fed when one is hungry and held establishes a kind of unity between mother and child that we are on the whole in favor of breaking up. What we are doing is saying to the infant, forget about a symbiotic relationship between you and your mother. This is going to be legislated from outside and enforced, and you're going to be let cry if you don't move on to the schedule of society. We teach an extreme individualism, and we give children the experience of a command and control system instead of the experience of working out over time a mutual system.
let's think about for a moment last year's conference. The theme was acting, learning, understanding. Acting can lead to understanding, and understanding can lead to acting, just as understanding informs acting, and acting informs understanding. So there's a circularity here. This means that there's no natural superiority, that acting is neither better nor worse than understanding. In other words, we need to think in terms of a non-hierarchical world.
To start up from a network of sort of alternative lifestyle people, about 30 years ago, have a 5-day gathering over the New Year. And so there's 300 to 500 people that turn up, but there's nobody who's actually in charge as such. So the decision making that happens is transitory, so it'll be somebody over here who makes a decision about a particular thing, and somebody over here will pick up the sort of leadership in the moment. Somewhere else, people step up when they feel the need to, and they also stop and pull back when they need.
It's very difficult to understand hierarchy in circularity. Circularity means if A then B, and if B then A, and it seems that we have a way of looking at the world which moves us from flatness into hierarchy, and that is something that we do with our thinking, and it's very powerful and very useful, but it's not something that we should be imposing on the world. It's something we should understand as a way of thinking that leads to certain types of understanding.
No wonder so many people found cybernetics and systems theory unintelligible. We are a society that is, to put simply, counter-cybernetic, that is constantly sending us the message, don't look at the whole system. Don't notice the context. Don't look at the broader relationships and interactions. Don't think of yourself as part of the natural world. Think of humans as different from and against or ruling over, quote, nature.
I've gotten a lot of sense that people are frustrated with the structure of society and the structure of the world we're creating.
I was brought up in the 30s in a middle-class family in Britain, and I was aware that there were problems called the Depression. They didn't mean very much to me because I was protected. I got into the army in the Second World War, and I ran slap full tilt into the realities of poverty and so on. And there was a song we used to sing in the army, "It's the same the old world over, it's the poor what gets the blame, it's the rich what gets the pleasure, ain't it all a bleeding shame?" It is a bleeding shame. It really is, you know. And here we are in Britain with the gap between the rich and the poor steadily widening all the time, as to income, as to actual wealth. Same thing is happening in the United States. And everybody says, oh. Now, why on earth should this be? Given episodes of quite liberal thinking, small l, in governments in both countries, it is because we have structured a system not understanding the principle of requisite variety, not understanding this feedback phenomenon, which is dedicated to producing this effect. I think that one should always consider when you look at a system which you say, oh, this is going wrong, how do we put it right? You should start by saying, why have we designed this stupid system to do the wrong thing?
This is the requisite variety song. Broken lines, broken strings, broken threads, broken springs, broken idols, broken heads, people sleeping in broken beds. Ain't no use trying, ain't no use joking. Sing it. Everything
academia should be a place where we all come together and have a serious discussion about the world we want to make. If cybernetics taught me anything, it's that physical forces don't make this world, humans make this world. It's the decisions we make, it's the organizations we build. It's the cutting edge of what's happening in the universe.
Cybernetics can be used for evil too. You can't assume that by having cybernetics we're going to better the world.
Cybernetics, being insight into how to use communication and control, can be used for evil the more everybody else is unaware of the fact that it's going on all the time. I think making people aware of the fact that it's going on all the time is the tipping point to then people saying, but wait a minute, if I'm actually performing my engagement with these structures, if we're all keeping this going together, then we should have some say and we can change it.
I'm learning that I'm doing really cybernetic work today, and it is like without even knowing the discourse, now it makes sense, resonate, but and then I think about it, oh, how does one work in cybernetics? Because the conference theme is living in cybernetics, but I think it should be cybernetic. I mean, living is cybernetic because, or is there any other way to live? I don't know, but theoretically, I mean, you need to get a sense of the field, a very generous field, to motivate further meaning out of it. And how could cybernetic be useful, such as feminism, for instance, for race and ethnical conflicts and conflict transformation? I mean, I would be very much interested in that, you know, like conjuncture. And yeah, I'm not saying like let's save the world with cybernetics, but I mean like there is a lot of, you know, revenues, but yeah.
And I think the key for cybernetics is not the definition, it's a vision for a different world.
The late Amos Wilson said, if we desire a better world, we must name the world we desire.
Desires.
I was thinking that perhaps we should reflect on the nature of our problem. Problems are always conflicts of desires.
Everyone does think in a reductionist way just because of the society we grew up in.
No language in the world has a way in its grammar to express systemic causation. If you change Lakoff's statement or claim to no language in the world has a way in its grammar to express cybernetic relationships, would you agree with that?
Well, that is the challenge, I think, of cybernetics.
It turns out to be a fairly novel thing to say to people. Independence is an illusion. We are all dependent on other human beings and on the quality of the air and the water and the planet we live on. And if we cannot be aware of that interdependence, we will act in ways that disrupt it.
In regards to the problem of global warming, we don't need another study to know what's happening. What we need are control systems that will do something about it. And we don't have that.
What we need is for people to change their minds.
Yes. What about Max? I'm very much for Max. Max is a particular friend of mine. Would you tell us about him, please?
Yes! Come here! I have!
Have what?
Come here!
Weren't you there?
I was.
When?
When you are right.
When am I right?
When you think that I was there.
But you are here, not there.
Right. You see, you're right.
How can I be right and wrong at the same time?
You can't. When you think that I was there, you are right. When you think that I am here, you are right. Since I, at the same time, was there and am here, you, at the same time, were right and are right, since I was first there and now am here. You simply have to be able to change your mind and the sloppy thinking that runs your mind. You have to try to be intelligent you have to be trustworthily unreliable. And then you have to use this ability not to cheat and deceive, but use it rather to liberate process from the bondage of belief, custom, habit, principle, prejudice, fashion, medium, and other mentally violent immutables. The retroactive correction does not lead to apology, confessionals of sins, contrite genuflections, and vengeful hypocrisy. It encourages thinking, rethinking, humor, and the immense and cheerful respect for the inconsistencies when confronting so-called reality with critical contemplation, and your contemporaries with wonder and grateful disbelief. Max! Yes! Where are you? Here!
You see, Max was and is a dog. Who are you? Who have you been? Have you ever been a dog?
Yes and no.
Well, then I'm afraid that you are right. At the same time, however, I wish I was where you are right, wrong.
Yes. Yes. Yes! You were! You've got it! Where I was wrong, right! Let us go and tell the world.
You live through this streaming thing. There's got to be some way to talk about it, otherwise it's a wasted experience. So for instance, the 60s were wrong and we're right now. And music can show examples where you can think you're within a certain key signature and you're absolutely right. If any of you know about modulation, and then the composer snaps it upon you that actually you are now in a different key signature. So you are right before, and there's a big change, and you're right after. And that's an idea that the composers work with, poets work with, possibly maybe scientists work with this too, I don't know, showing that one can have had a change of mind and have been right before and have been right afterwards.
You are not after the truth, you can do that.
I think cybernetics is much about constructing, and we construct science.
Scientists play as if they were only scientists when they are not. So my only possibility, using Herbert's expression, is to anti-communicate. Is to use my words in such a way that I force them to mean what I want. And to force them to mean what I want, I have to create a whole condition in which they mean what I want. Curiously enough, I want them to mean what they mean in daily life. And the problem with scientists is that they consider them separated from daily life. And this is, yes, these scientists consider themselves separated from daily life. They claim that they are not emotional, that emotions do not participate in what they do, and so on and so forth. And it's not true.
The purpose of science is to describe what is, whereas cybernetics is a performative, forward-looking search.
One tradition in the American Society for Cybernetics community is composing imperatives. Some argue imperatives go against an ethical cybernetics. I consider them paradoxical invitations. At the ASC 2009 meeting, as a tribute to Herbert Brunn, Larry Richards introduced the anti-communication imperative. If you seek the new, compose asynchronicity. Today I introduce the transformer imperative. If you seek the new, compose, no matter how perform anti-communication.
Anytime anyone told anything, there was no repetition.
We're starting up with what is cybernetics, and that's really, really difficult to find an answer for it. And yet I get a real sense that all of us has a concept of an essence of what it is that we just know. And so I'm wondering, what is it that has enabled us to actually have the sense of what cybernetics is all about? Because if we can recognise that in ourselves, maybe we can activate that in other people outside.
There's also the question, what do we want it to be?
I'm very new to cybernetics, but I've been in the realms of systems thinking
But I feel that cybernetics actually has the potential to clarify very clearly the processes of how we think. And in recent leadership literature and leadership development literature, they're actually saying in leadership studies that leadership development needs to grow bigger minds. And so for me, I sort of think that cybernetics may have sort of like a porthole there of being able to develop something to enable us to create in the future.
Doing my master's, and I talk about cybernetics there, and I have to explain that what it is at first. It's really hard. So trying to do that, I found something like creating stable descriptions for change. So then you create a system. There is a stable description of it, and you say that if some perturbation happens and this system don't have variety to deal with it, it just how do you say, disintegrate or something like this. But actually, what disintegrates is your description of the system. Like it's not stable anymore because of it changed, you know, and you had a stable description. The thing changed for another thing, and when you can describe that in a stable way, it's going to be undescribable. Yeah, like
when gets in the way.
Yeah, it's in the way for you to understand, and then you have another systematizing or something like this.
The nervous system organizes the world to organize itself. And what happens if you turn it around? I don't think you should.
You have objectivity.
The notion of equilibrium, of course, comes directly from Piaget. And it's intimately connected with the notion of viability. Viability is whatever allows you to maintain your equilibrium. The ability of something that you're doing to get past the obstacles.
Is viability similar to requisite variety?
Requisite variety was Ross Ashby, Roger Conan. I don't think so. I mean, if you like, you need a requisite variety if you want to control something. So it's necessary for a viability, for a viable control mechanism. Let me phrase this differently. If you want to build a mechanism that controls some process or some activity, the mechanism you build must at least have the same possibility of varieties, of variability, as the thing itself.
So maybe viability makes more sense when talking about second-order cybernetics, and requisite variety
Oh,
makes
absolutely.
more sense when talking
Yes.
about first-order cybernetics.
Yes.
It's a relationship.
Where observation is very inclusive. I use the word observation because as soon as you say observed or observing, you've left something out, which I don't want to leave out. It's a very big, broad space.
Now, second-order cybernetics came from the cybernetics of cybernetics. Heinz von Förster described second-order cybernetics, or distinguished it from first-order, in the following way. He said, first-order cybernetics is the cybernetics of observed systems. Second-order cybernetics is the cybernetics of observing systems. And I again have used my device of prepositions to distinguish them, to talk about the difference of having the observer of a system and the observer in the system. The observer in the system being the second-order cybernetic observer.
The focus was on systems that do the observing, and that do the thinking, and that do the exploiting and all that. So that was the second-order cybernetics, which is all based on self-organization.
Now, If we're talking about second-order cybernetics, we should be talking about it not from a first-order point of view, that is, not in the way that a traditional scientist will talk about. If we're going to be consistent, we need an observer in the system. And Heinz also insisted that an observing system requires an observer. That is to say that this detached observer, who retains a certain coolness and so on, is not really part of the second-order cybernetic world. And if we're going to describe it, then I think we have to be very careful about the way in which we use the observer, characterize the observer.
He's my client and he knew what he did, yeah. Don't take him seriously.
No, you have to take off. He's not eating loose nuts.
We'll all know Heinz's and famous quote, "Objectivity is an observer's delusion. Observing can be done without him."
Or her. Let's be inclusive.
When Newton meets Forster, complexity vanishes and simplicity remains. Being part of the system and outside the system, can we also add one more dimension? Being part of the system, outside the system, also sometimes apart from the system.
We, as observers, in our explanations, what are we doing? We're using our experience to explain our experience. So this is an explanation, and we use the system to describe the domain in which the system arose. I have said sometime that it is like in the golden times of pharmacology, in which the pharmacologist went around with the rabbit that immersed in different soups, and then you look at what happened to the rabbit and describe the soup in terms of what changes or wiggles the rabbit was making. You put the rabbit there and say, haha, such and such a substance. You put it here and say, haha, such and such a substance. And we, human beings, are hanging from ourselves and immersing in different soups, and we then describes the soup in which we were immersed.
It's a very slow process. Part of that is because of the revolutionary ideas that are introduced by cybernetics.
The unit of survival is the organism in its environment. That is what has to be protected, that relationship.
As we look at the pattern of our relationships and we discuss them, that discussion is in itself part of our description. And so I wanted to bring in a quote. The problem of trying to transmit our ecological reasoning to those whom we wish to influence in what seems to us to be an ecologically good direction is in itself an ecological problem.
We are not outside the ecology for which we plan. We are always and inevitably a part of it.
This, in effect, means that we live in cybernetics. We don't just stand outside and admire it and describe it, that we have to act with it.
So actually, I think kindergarten is a little late to start learning cybernetics.
I think probably all of us in this room have felt more than once like we were all alone in working with this material. In fact, I know that Gregory did. Pretty soon you don't fit in anywhere when you're working with everything. So, you're not a scientist and you're not a not scientist. You're not an academic and you're not a not academic.
I'm Fred Starr and I'm delighted to be here. Ranulph asked Jane, knowing full well that behind all presidents and behind the way most conferences work, there's someone who's actually doing a lot of the work who doesn't claim credit. With there being no systems and cybernetics programs, you always wound up being identified as not whatever one that everyone else was. So I have this history of being not the family therapist, not the engineer, not the clinical psychologist. So a whole history of knots.
Magicians introduce a certain self-reference into such systems. They will do things like this.
Problem, or not.
I don't need anybody else. But they cheat.
Oh, you cheated?
Why do you say they cheat?
Yeah, what did you do?
Well, I'm not allowed to show you how I cheat, otherwise I would not be a legitimate magician.
So it takes cheating to be a legitimate magician?
No, it takes the desire of the observer to see magic, to have magic.
I'm really not concerned of discussing what is cybernetics. I find cybernetics as I go, and I find it in many authors, and I'm not concerned of debating correctness. There's many different perspectives, and they share a language, and I think the most special thing about cybernetics to me is the language. There's notions that come with different perspectives that without the language maybe I wouldn't have found and I wouldn't have used, and they help me to think about myself, to think about the relationship the world that I find has to my own intentionality, to my being in the world. And I think to newcomers to cybernetics like myself, this is probably more useful, seeing cybernetics as an open field, as an offer.
What do you see as the heart of it for you?
The language that we use, the
language
the words
that
we all share an interest in.
As cyberneticists.
Yeah. Immediately there come many different ways come about of understanding that. There's this idea of control.
Control is the misnomer. Wiener knew you couldn't control. When I speak to students about this, I say, when you hear control, think attempt to regulate. Don't think control in the sense that it doesn't have a choice and I can get whatever I want. And you can also shift communication as well, away from Shannon messaging to PASC conversations. And then I think you're done.
The problem is that we're still in this Shannon information age. Shannon messaging means that you're going to send me something that I can already expect. And all I have to do is figure out, did you mean this or that? That or that or that or that or that or that. But the Shannon model doesn't allow me to understand how I can know something new. And because all of the technology we're making, I claim, is based on the Shannon model, messages that are expected, we are essentially screwing ourselves and making the cost of conversation go up. Because the cost of messages goes down, the deluge of messages goes up, and so the cost of conversation goes up. This is my hypothesis. We can't solve the problem with the technology that's caused it. And in order to innovate, I am proposing this thing called conversation theory that can lead to the idea of a new economy, an economy of insight, an economy in which insight is the thing that we want to make. So I envision a new kind of technology, a technology which helps us reach insights, not which helps us send messages.
What is special about that language?
That we are all interested in it, and that we are still debating what that could mean. I think by the time we come about what that really means, it's boring, and we will move on.
This is a very typical conversation for the American Society for Cybernetics. There's sort of two classes of people. People who enjoy this kind of conversation and people who are disoriented and severely puzzled by this kind of conversation.
Oh, I thought you meant the 1% and 99%.
It's less than 1%.
The title that we actually chose for today was Dancing with Cybernetics, and then in parentheses, Building Bridges in the Wind. And I think part of this was that what we have come to do, learn how to dance with cybernetics and dance with each other, but also that this dance is always taking place in rather precarious situations. So the notion of bridges with an idea of connecting, but also these bridges are under very windy conditions, and it's never quite clear how you create some sort of stable environment to move across.
Doesn't it sound familiar to you? No theory? No? I start with the same sound. Doesn't it sound familiar to you? It starts with the same two notes. Now I can connect those two keys. That's the word. Right? And this one. are pretty distant from one another with that one bridge. You can call it a harmonic pivot. So I can come from here. And you will find that very tonal and very nice. And it is a complete tease. It tells you I'm in C major, and then it tells you, you're in F sharp major, a place you never wanted to be in your life. And the old man, the one with the beard, you know, Brahms, remember? Teutonic, right? Yeah. This note is called, in our language, a D. I wasn't there when it was baptized, but it is D. When I press a pedal, then it stays. Wow. And then I can say, aha. So I'm in D major. Or that's D minor or rock and roll. So, Brahms says, I give you this, and then I do this. Now we are elsewhere, totally elsewhere. And all the time you have the feeling you are on solid ground. This is nice. This is a love affair with both partners, totally settled on unsafe ground and enjoying no end. So this is a relationship or connection, as I like it, between musical teasing, narrative teasing, tension, surprises, all these notions, which are all after the fact. They came into our language only after we had some urge to describe what happened to me, to you.
I want to tell you a story, which is actually the one that Randolph wanted me to tell you. I think I'm still 8 years old. And one day my mother says, we're going to go visit some people who are friends of mine, and they have a little boy, and he's your age exactly, and he's having problems in school, getting along with the other children. So I'd like you to tell me how it goes when you play with him. So we went to this apartment uptown somewhere, and there was this little boy named Bobby. Bobby was no fun to play with. He wouldn't share. He pulled my braids. He pinched me. He ignored me. It was the pits. This child did not know how to play with another child.
With the other.
And I suppose if my mother had not told me to be paying attention and observing what was happening, I would have headed into the living room, out of the playroom, and said, Mommy, I don't want to play with that little boy. He's no fun. But she had asked me to be an observer. I think it was the first time I ever was consciously in the role of an observer. So a couple of hours later, she called me and we went out and got in a taxi cab. And she said, how did you get on with Bobby? Tell me about it. And I said, wait till we get home, and I will dictate to you about my experience of Bobby, so that if any other child has to play with a child like him, they'll have something to rely on.
And it was published in Mother's Day.
No, it wasn't. It was never published. And I've never found it. I think it's somewhere in the Library of Congress, but since I don't know Bobby's surname or the date quite, I've never found it. But I do remember it as an event because, just parenthetically, you know, just as it's important to read to children, it's important to take dictation. The power for a little kid of seeing your words on paper so they can then come back is incredible. Changes your whole sense of the written word.
What is cybernetics?
When I'm asked this question, and usually I get asked this question when I explain them on my way to something involving cybernetics, and then the person asks me, the first question I usually get asked back is, do I get to meet Tom Cruise because they think it's Dianetics? Or they ask me if we still have Walt Disney's head on ice because they think it's chirogenics. My soundbite back is always, it is the art of reflexive questioning of context.
I like Pask's idea of the art and science of the defensible metaphor.
Manipulating defensible metaphors.
Thank you.
What do you mean by a defensible metaphor?
The focus is on language. The idea is we live in metaphors. Cybernetics is the art and science of manipulating those metaphors, manipulating language, manipulating life.
The discourse happens in language. It seems a restricted explanation or definition of cybernetics because it's only taking place in language, but part of those metaphors that work are the formulas that make planes fly and keep them in the air. So,
What is the criteria for?
No, I think we're not listening to what Larry said. When Pask says metaphor, he doesn't mean metaphor in the sense of analogy metaphor. He means language. He means living. He means enacting through the words you use.
Maturana's idea of the consensual domain. The consensual domain becomes linguistic, and Pask was embodying that notion.
Well, now you're talking about the defensible part, because it's a way in which we live together.
I think that we operate as structure-determined entities. This means that at any moment we do the only thing that we can do. You ask me a question and I give you an answer, and it's the only answer I can give to you. Now, in the process of giving the answer, we human beings are listening to the answer that we're giving. So we are changing the situation completely in the process, and I may think, aha, I could have given this other answer. In the long run, what is happening is that I have given you the only answer I could give you. So in the strict sense, choice is not there. Yet as a commentary of my reflection upon what I do, choice is there.
I've been talking about what happened.
What happened in the past. Well, this we can do, of course, and we do. Again, as a reflection on our present.
Talk about the future.
Well, the future, if we talk about the future, in fact, we're talking about the computation of transformations from the present into which we are. Now, we have this ability, because we exist in language, of operating in such a way that we can talk about our being now and make explanation about how are we in the present, and this is history, or computations about what could be transformations from this present, and we call this the future.
We today behave as if we could not understand this future, although it is the only thing we should understand. The past is past, the present happens anyway, and understanding and agreement has to be given to false statements.
As human beings, we find ourselves here, now, in a praxis of living, in a happening of being humans in the present, in which everything that happens as an element of our praxis of living immersed in languaging. Your present changes, your past changes, your present changes, your future changes. So I focus and design toward a future I desire, And when I turn my desires into false statements, a praxis for social transformations that I desire might emerge.
Could you explain to people what you mean by a false statement?
False statement is something you desire to be true but isn't yet true, so you make a false statement. First you come to what you desire, and then out of that one can come to false statements.
This is not trivial. And this is an explanation, of course, because as we do this, we're changing this dynamics, so that we're changing according to how we're explaining our present.
The predicament of self-reference is that I am continuously reflecting on what I'm doing, whether I make it explicit or not. All these levels, allegedly regressive levels, are not regressive because where I actually am is where I actually am.
I am in the present. I was in the future. I will be in the past.
And because we're in it all the time, it is very difficult to reflect on what I am talking about doing it now.
In response to what is cybernetics? When is cybernetics?
Yes. And?
No more right now.
In particular, I like the idea of conversations that are both logocentric and non-logocentric. So I can have a conversation where I'm talking with somebody, but I can have a conversation through material substrates, or I can have a conversation through using films, or I can have a conversation through lighting systems like musical. And in terms of past, sometimes that was a metaphor, and sometimes it was an analogical approach to the conversation.
And I'm here to talk to you about screens. So screens, you see, are these things that come between us and yet connect us very well. We have this kind of a screen, and this kind of a screen, and this kind of screen. This is a paper, yes, it's a pad. I suggest you think of the first screen as being the screen of your mind, which represents you, which is who you are, and what you want, and what you're looking for, and what you wish to do next, and who you wish to be, and where you wish to go, and so on. And the screen that is you and the screen that is material are different. And there are many possible material screens, but there's only one possible you. If you're doing all of these things, then you're in contention between the thing that is you, the screen that is you, and the screen that is the thing that you're using, because you are you. So if you have two screens, please make a distinction between you and everything else, please. Because only then can you use your time gracefully, and with intention, and with balance, and with connectedness. The connectedness between who you are and the material that you wish to interact with, to be yourself. It's kind of a dance, you see, it's a dance of screens. Things are going like this all the time, and some of it's you and some of it's that other person's screen. Some of it's material and some of it's calculated, some of it's mechanical and electronical and so on. But you see, it all comes back to the one screen.
And the idea of learning through conversation.
Forms. You can have a conversation with a form, something not another person.
And through the form. The form can enable a way of understanding.
One thing I've discovered is the tremendous power and responsibility of the rapporteur, particularly in reporting on such a rich dance of conflict. We talked about form, we talked about the decay of form, we talked about the retardation of that decay when we wish to conserve something we value. We talked about the form of values and desires as constraints. Two questions. One, when can conversation be subversive without appearing subversive and hence dismissed? And what guidelines or ethics can help sustain such a process?
I guess what I feel about the future of cybernetics is that the ethical implications of cybernetics are so profound that we need to continue to do all that we can to influence people's thinking to be more systemic.
For most part of my life, I had no idea what science was and how science is done, but I cannot remember a time in my life when I was not a cybernetician. I think since my very, very early memories, I was struck by the difficulty of figuring out the other and how to engage with others in a way that allows doing justice to both the other and myself. And that I'm still learning, and cybernetics is giving me a vocabulary in that learning process.
Tom triggers my favorite definition of cybernetics at the moment, and that's the art of maintaining equilibrium in a world of constraints and possibilities.
I got to that definition originally because Gregory Bateson had written an article about evolution and the theory of evolution. And in that article, he had made very clear that the theory of evolution is not a causal theory, but it is a theory that works by constraints. And it was that made me realize that indeed that seemed the most salient characteristic of cybernetics, that it is interested in constraints and not in causes. And the interest in constraints means that you learn to sort of cope with constraints by finding other possibilities that don't conflict with the constraints. And that indeed is very much the picture of evolution, where those organisms survive that do not hit fatal obstacles during their existence.
And if the habitat is destroyed, the species will not survive.
Our group is Theme Group 2, looking at the creation of a cybernetic curriculum.
So a circle is like an idea or a concept or whatever, something, and that might be embodied in all kinds of things. So this might be a website or an encyclopedia or a lesson plan, or it might be a university course. The first observation we had is, like, traditionally there's kind of a path. So I kind of learn this first, or do this first, and when I get to this, I can use this to do that. But I can't start here, I need to have done that first. And then sometimes we have options, so maybe from this I can go in different ways, and we could call that kind of options or diversity or choice. But all of my experience and everyone I'm with is still like this, so it's still a line. So what we thought was, if the curriculum will have an opportunity for me to navigate through it and explore it, rather than just follow it, then it has to have more than one point of entry. So we thought, well, maybe there are different ideas we can start with, and it's important that we can start in all the places, or a whole set of places. And that means that when we get into it and move through it, although we're still going inevitably, chronologically through what we can do things in different orders, and we can meet other people who are on different trajectories. So the first kind of observation is that these ideas, so the ones that are on the border, need to have no jargon. So I have to be able to start on any one of these without having done any of the others. These ones, we can have some jargon because maybe these are the ones that you have to have done something else to get to, say, right? So these could be the complex ideas that, maybe I don't understand yet, and so on. But actually the simple ones are the ones that do the connecting to other things. And there's maybe two kinds of questions. One is, what's it like inside this? So how do I navigate? How do I explore? And then what does that mean to the outside?
We are really used to have borders, and in this concept, you actually you try to create a kind of shift between the borders. The borders are created and recreated through the navigation, and not something you have at the end. Normally, you have a teacher actually trying to create a framework or limit your ability to navigate. By navigating, he's doing this feedback loops and actually changing and correcting what his goals are.
This diagram, this is kind of obvious, right? So we do some stuff, we reflect on it, we change what we're trying to do. But it's a crucial question within this, how that's manifest in a way that helps us explore rather than help us just refine an end goal. That mechanism is just identified as a crucial part of the curriculum. I guess that's as far as we got with that.
And how could the system work on these feedbacks, on direct feedback, what I want to go to do tomorrow, next month, on 1 year feedback, and to the future. So this constant loop changing what I don't want to do. And we think the system now is trying to hold on this focus, because you have a concept, what is an architect? He has to learn this, this and that. So actually the student is rethinking the profession of architecture. He's through the process, but we are trying to constrain this. The curriculum is constraining this concept of architect. So what we are thinking, how can the student, by rethinking this, rethink the whole border of architecture? Now, how can we, through education, through learning, rethink the profession?
So what is cybernetics?
Are each of us allowed, I guess in our own epistemology, to decide what is the criteria for being defensible?
Sure. That was, I think, embedded in...
It's a question. You're rolling your eyes. It's just a question.
I think that's embedded in Hask's definition. It is an invitation to any observer to define it as they see it. That's the beauty of some of these definitions that don't make sense. Yeah.
Paul, do you respond to that?
I always agree with Judy. No, after I hear what she says, I agree with her. I might not have agreed beforehand. I mean that.
Google grants us 5 million. What are we going to do with it?
That's backwards, I think.
I can answer that in 2 seconds. What's the better question?
That's a good question.
If we had the money to do what we will, want, desire with others, when embracing asynchronicity, conflict, tensions, differences, so that others not like us would feel comfortable coming here more than one time, so conversations can happen and newness can emerge, then we'll know where we're going.
May I respond to that? I love you, Judy. That is beautiful. I don't know what to do. I want to know.
It will come clear.
Yes, I agree with that. But even that doesn't help me know what to do. Does that mean that we sit there? Do we have dinner? That would be something to do.
We do the desires exercise. We figure out what we want. We embrace our differences in that conversation so that then we'll know what we want to do as a group.
Great. And do we do that at dinner, or do we do that at a conference, or do we do that by writing?
We do it in a conference. We do it in anything and every way we interact.
So that's not fucking helpful.
Wait, I'm confused. I thought you took it seems to me you took 2 different points of view. I thought you said a moment ago that if an opportunity arose, we would know what to do.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, then
I said starting from thinking we have the money may not be helpful, but
well,
Tom
maybe there's your problem.
clarified it to say, irrespective of resources, what should we do? And that's a clarifying question, which I agree with.
Let's add a bit more variety to this conversation
Please.
by involving the audience.
You get $5 million from Google, everybody will know that there is money in cybernetics. That's number one. Number two, you get $5 million from Google, you'll get $10 million from the US government. See?
And they will tell you what to do.
No, they will not tell you. No. You don't need to take it then. Right? If you don't accept their conditions, then you don't need to take it. Yeah. It's not in the stone, it's in the ripple. It's in the perception of other people that there's something going on in cybernetics.
I'd like to ask you or reflect on Gregory Bateson's long-time devotion to say the conscious purpose is what ruins the ecology. So I think the more we focus on what we want and push it forwards, we might just ruin the ecology.
One of the essays that Gregory wrote, Steps to Ecology of Mind, he talked about there are billions of people who are going to die, or whole species, or nations, but whatever it was bad. Unless we dealt with one of these 3 conditions. One is population growth, another one is technological change, and the other is what he called the Occidental idea of man. And he thought maybe the idea that we have of ourselves, maybe that's the idea that might change. So some idea of us.
I'm trying to grapple with that.
Maybe somebody else.
My biology is happening now, your biology is happening now, but we talk about studying biology as though it doesn't happen in any given time. It just happened. It just is.
I want to hear the stories. I want to hear the stories about how it actually was applied and changed something somewhere in the last decade. I'd like to have those conversations.
That's hoping to contribute to the conversation of the role of the arts, and particularly the dramatic arts, as a place of modeling, as a place of relating, doing multiple things. The theater is already a deeply cybernetic enterprise,
sure.
But it has not been used consciously that way.
First of all, shamelessly I will tell, I think I'm doing that. I also will more modestly say that I'm not at all alone. I'm not a unique seeder. There are more people than meet the eye who are concerned with just reforming things. They are more concerned with revolutionizing, radically changing. However, occasionally the word evolution is attached to the hope that a revolution can be slow and painless. I don't mind. If that is what it takes, let's have a slow and painless revolution. Let's regard its decay.
Don't people make revolutions because they haven't the patience for the evolution?
That's history. It's journals and media. Even the word people in some plural sense is usually a rumor.
Yeah.
And whether a rumor is true or not is a question of time, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the evening. So we cannot either scientifically nor aesthetically rely on it. But we can gossip with one another playfully about how can we describe our pleasure that a good idea was miscarried. Since we cannot repeat a miscarried good idea verbatim, we have to reinvent the good idea. Originally, the idea of educating was not a bad idea. It's been miscarried. So we have to reinvent, I use your term with pleasure, education. Several of us are doing it. And I recently spoke with several people who have started educational dynamics in form of schools, in form of experimental schools, new schools, all kinds. And that must be motivated by some discontent with tradition and with simply obeying the language that speaks us.
We've named our school the School for Designing a Society. And you could here think, we could have named it the School for Resigning Ourselves to Society. The School for fitting in and getting away with it while looking good and doing bad.
We would like to be able at last to know how to teach language to say what we would like to think. So become teachers of language, and not language teachers.
I like these ideas. I don't. My way has worked for hundreds of years. Why should I change? Well, because maybe I need you to. Learner, you could also take responsibility. You might not know what you want to learn, and yet you can still learn how to observe, reflect, and respond to that which is around you. All of you can. Well, perhaps an afternoon program after school hours are done. That way, you mainstream school, you won't get disturbed with what you want to offer. Yet, at least, learner, you could try your hand at some cyberneticking and play some games and try some tasks which aim at building awareness and articulation. And even if the schools don't want to play with you, your playing will give you a sense of understanding about yourself and what is of interest around you. And then you might even be able to take this to other learners and create your own means of learning. Who knows, maybe by your designing your own learning, this will lead to the normal school slowly changing to meet your variety, rather than changing you to meet its variety. Bah!
So, if I'm not a violent person, but I want to change of the system, not in the system, language becomes my essential for doing that. Mm-hmm. Language in performance that reflects dynamics is even more inviting.
Is Larry Richards in the house?
The topic was framed as the cybernetician as a public intellectual, or the public intellectual in a cybernetic world, or how to act publicly so that ideas can make a difference. Two of the ideas that resonated, I think, was one, that the idea of the public intellectual as a celebrity is something that cybernetic thinking does not necessarily support. So I had to rethink the idea of public intellectual, and probably the word isn't even appropriate, but it serves as a kind of model for what we're trying to get at. How to act publicly so that ideas can make a difference. And the other, which is the theme actually I've heard throughout the conference and in some of the other presentations, was that it's not be something that is in the mode of marketing, in the sense of hard marketing, advertising, selling, but rather something that is enticing, drawing in, and that has to also then be thought about what the consequences are. So one idea was that the arts provide a possible model or approach to doing this differently, and we had all kinds of ideas for that, but one of them that we'll show is this short piece that Tom and Jude have worked on, just as something to have a conversation about.
There are the metalogs that Gregory Bateson wrote that appear in Steps to an Ecology of Mind. These are quasi-fictitious dialogues between father and daughter. I will be playing the daughter, but you will be playing the father. Daddy, what is an instinct?
An instinct, my dear, is an explanatory principle.
But what does it explain?
Anything, almost anything at all, anything you want it to explain.
Don't be silly, it doesn't explain gravity.
No, but that is because nobody wants instinct to explain gravity. If they did, it would explain it. We could simply say that the moon has an instinct whose strength varies inversely as the square of the distance.
But that's nonsense, Daddy.
Yes, surely. But it was you who mentioned instinct, not I.
All right. But then, what does it explain gravity?
Nothing, my dear, because gravity is an explanatory principle.
Oh. So inevitably, when the objective creature looks at animals, it splits things up and makes the animals look like human beings after their intellects have invaded their souls.
Exactly. It's a sort of inhumane anthropomorphism.
And that is why the objective people study all the little things instead of the larger things?
Yes, it's called SR psychology. It's easy to be objective about sex, but not about love.
Klaus. Now this is an example what I think is teaching. It is a very different kind of dialogue. It opens constantly challenging questions. And this is what I'm personally trying to do. I'm asking questions, and I'm challenging actually existing prejudices or preconceptions or what exists. And to me that is, I think, an important element of teaching. Question, not asking a question, but question assumptions.
What I would love to share with you is the experience of pure love. That's what I can explain. I had the near-death experience when I had my second child, and many things that happened to me along my life made me realize what was happening. And the experience of pure love is you begin feeling that you don't have any kind of border. You don't have skin anymore. You begin feeling not only being the other, but being the things, being everything. You are all with one. And when you allow yourself of have this feeling, the inner world with the outer world becomes together. They unify.
I'm an optimist. And I'm an optimist because I think that in the core of human life, as in mammalian life in general, the biology of love is the fundament. the fundament, the biology of love. And what you will observe is that there are many things, strides, wars, killing, and either this leads to destruction or a new beginning, and the new beginning is always in the biology of love. It's always in the constitution of some core of mutual respect and mutual acceptance, through which something new
begins. However,
we can live in any culture that does not kill us before reproduction. Now this is terrible, but at the same time hopeful, isn't it?
I'd like to defend this distinction between what is and when is. A what is question invites or asks for a single answer, an absolute answer. This is what science does. It looks for the absolute explanation. If it's not right, they'll change it later, but that's what it's asking. The when is question is asking for a temporary answer. When is the time? When is it right? The when is question invites multiple answers. So every one of these answers, every one of these here is a potential answer at a particular time, depending on what the person wants at that time.
The award you're giving me, the Warren McCulloch Award, could be considered an award for lifelong achievement. The award I'm receiving, however, is the award for lifelong avoidance. Avoidance doesn't mean to just not do something. Avoidance happens when you do not something. When you do, but not something. I think of avoidance as something I do that I'm proud of. It goes like this. Somebody says, "Why do I have to go to school?" Important question. Answer, in order to learn what to avoid. See what's done, you avoid that. That's avoidance. So I'm suggesting we could shift the paradigm temporarily from achievement to avoidance. Woo. Avoidance becomes the landmark, not to forego achievement, but to dethrone it temporarily. There is merit to refusing to learn, to refusing to learn. So someone's trying to teach me that the systems we see in place are way bigger than any particular group's ability to change it. That's a lesson I'm refusing to learn. For those of us who create sentences, and I know you all do, we're aware that part of a sentence's significance comes from the alternatives we speakers and writers have rejected. The significance of a particular sentence comes partly from the alternatives we've rejected.
You could ask the question, what is not cybernetics? Cybernetics is not an ideology. It is not a philosophy. You could also point to when is cybernetics useful. For me, I say cybernetics is not about achieving something. It's not about achievement. Cybernetics, if you know what you want and you know it's possible, you don't need cybernetics. You just go and do it. Cybernetics is useful when you want something, you think you want something, but you think it's impossible. Cybernetics then is about how to reconfigure resources in order to get what you want, in order to create a new system, not just a little improvement on the current one.
I find my thinking shifting as I listen in on this conversation. My correspondences or metaphors or whatever, the understandings continue to shift, a kind of a constancy of movement.
That's the steering.
Mm-hmm. But it's not intentional. That's the other part of it. It isn't an intentional steering that I think I know where I'm going to go, but steering more in the way of how I'm listening rather than on what I believe.
Well, there is another intent. There is your intent to create a world listening. Your desire to have
a desire, maybe more than an intent. I go back to
that's right.
Judy's there.
People listen for understanding rather than agreement. So conflict is an invitation to turn
together.
If you take each end carefully, and I'll get out of the way. Oh. Where did that come
How would you undo the knot?
from? How would I undo it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd take a scissors and I would go.
Other than that, without cutting it.
Well, let's see. If she hands it back to me, it might get undone. It did.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So we can
What a
exchange
metaphor.
back and
Thank
forth.
you
We can
so
have a
much.
conversation where we exchange noddedness.
Exactly. You deal with the knot and through the conversation and going back and forth through conversation, the knot disappears.
Maybe we're not doing theory, but we're doing improv theater here, now.
Yes. Maybe even some of us are not doing improv, but actually doing and acting based on the concepts of how the metaphors of cybernetics has affected my life, and are performing daily life, hopefully in a way that might transform a conversation.
I hope that you will take the idea that we might consider living in cybernetics carefully and seriously.
It's a conundrum of trying to oversimplify what it is we are doing when it is a path of experiences. Even for you, it was through experiences that you had that you came to this. And you can't just give that experience to somebody else. They have to have it.
It sounds like we were asking for a dictionary definition or the soundbite, and we knew before we started that we weren't going to get a definition in the sense of this is a that.
You do.
It just isn't a this is the that kind of situation.
So from my point of view, thank you very much. Robert?
So the last 2 days have been about, of course, the idea of living in cybernetics.
Living in cybernetics and applying cybernetics assumes that it's there. It's the last word. And I think that is something that I would like to avoid. That's what religion is about. And I think what we have to do is actually to advance cybernetics and change it and improve upon it. And that is, and there were many contributions of that kind, but I think this living in cybernetics gets us back into kind of believers. And I feel very uncomfortable about this.
Thank you.
I think Von Forster said A is better off if B is better
off when.
Which is a very simple when B is better.
I think I would be better off if all of you get a chance to take a break now.
Bums. Economic. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Reality. The real